November 14th, 1944. 09:47 hours. Near Aachen, Germany. Lieutenant James Bates has exactly 15 seconds to live. He knows this with absolute certainty because he has done the math 100 times before. His Sherman's 75mm gun cannot penetrate a Panther's frontal armor at 300 yards. The shell will bounce off like a pebble striking concrete. But the Panther's gun will punch through his Sherman like paper. He has seen it happen to other crews. He has smelled the burning flesh. He has heard the screams. The Panther's turret stops moving. The gun barrel points directly at him. Bates opens his mouth to give the order to reverse. And then the Panther explodes. The turret lifts 3 feet off the chassis before crashing back down. Black smoke pours from every hatch. Bates stares completely frozen. His gun did not fire. He saw no aircraft. He heard no artillery. Then he hears it. The sharp crack of a 90mm gun from somewhere far behind him. A gun that the United States Army Ordnance Department declared physically impossible to mount on a mobile chassis just 3 years earlier. A gun that one stubborn civilian engineer built anyway. This is the story of Harley Earl's impossible gun. The weapon that transformed American tank destroyers from coffins into tiger killers. And it begins not on a battlefield, but in an office where bureaucracy nearly killed more American boys than German shells ever could. Spring 1942. Aberdeen, Proving Ground, Maryland. Major General Andrew Davis. Bruce cannot sleep anymore. Every night he reviews the same casualty projections. Every night, his stomach turns. The numbers are theoretical. America has not yet committed armor to large-scale combat in Europe. But British intelligence from North Africa tells him everything he needs to know. German panzer forces are fielding monsters. The Panzer Mark V Panther, the Panzer Mark VI Tiger. These are not the tanks American doctrine was designed to fight. These are 45-ton and 54-ton beasts with thick sloped armor and guns that can kill from 2 kilometers away. The standard American M4 Sherman carries a 75mm gun designed for infantry support. Against a Tiger's frontal armor, it is useless. The British learned this at Gazala. One Tiger destroyed 12 British tanks before withdrawing. One tank, 12 kills. The math is simple and terrifying. American factories can outproduce Germany 20-1. But every Sherman contains 5 American boys. Farm kids from Iowa, factory workers from Detroit, college boys from New York. Bruce does not see production numbers. He sees body bags. He sees telegrams to mothers. He sees flag-draped coffins. The solution seems obvious. America already has the 90mm M1 anti-aircraft gun. It fires a 24-pound shell at 3,000 feet per second. It can punch through 6 inches of armor at 1,000 yards. That is enough to kill a Tiger from the front, enough to engage a Panther from distances where the German cannot shoot back. But there is a problem. The 90mm gun weighs 19,000 pounds. When it fires, it generates 30 tons of recoil force. It requires a fixed mount with outriggers and ground spades. Putting it on a mobile tank chassis violates basic physics. Bruce orders the Ordnance Department to investigate anyway. Their answer comes back in June. 37 pages of calculations and analysis. The conclusion is absolute. Impossible. The recoil would shatter any chassis. The weight would overwhelm any suspension. The turret ring would need complete redesign. Production would be delayed for months. Bruce reads the report twice. He knows the engineers are not wrong. But he also knows American boys are going to die. He needs someone who does not accept impossible as an answer. Harley Earl is nobody. In spring 1942, he is 38 years old, stocky, thinning hair, wire-rimmed glasses. He looks like a small-town accountant, not an engineer who will save thousands of lives. Before the war, Earl designed industrial machinery. Hydraulic presses, mining conveyors, equipment that handled massive forces other engineers said could not be managed. He built a career on solving problems everyone else called impossible. In 1941, the Army recruited him to work on tank destroyers at Aberdeen. He spent 6 months making small improvements to the M10. Good work, careful work, invisible work. Then General Bruce handed him the Ordnance Department's report. Earl took it back to his cramped office in a converted warehouse. He read it for 3 days straight, made notes on a yellow legal pad. The Ordnance Department was technically correct. Every objection was valid, if you accepted their assumptions. Earl did not accept assumptions. He questioned them. That was his gift. On the 4th day, he started sketching. The Ordnance Department asked the wrong question. They asked if you could mount a 90mm gun on an existing chassis. Earl asked a different question. What chassis would you need to build for a 90mm gun? This distinction changed everything. One approach accepts limits, the other redesigns around them. Earl started with the M10 hull, added reinforced floor plates to distribute recoil, cross-bracing in the hull structure, upgraded torsion bars for the suspension. Every modification added weight, but every modification also spread the 90mm gun's massive recoil across the entire vehicle instead of concentrating it at failure points. The turret was the real challenge. A conventional design would be too heavy. So Earl designed something unconventional. A low-profile, open-topped turret with a large box extending from the rear. He called it the bustle. The bustle did 2 things. First, it counterbalanced the 2-ton gun barrel extending forward. Second, it stored the larger 90mm ammunition. 47 rounds, nearly 3 feet long each, over 40 pounds per shell. But the real innovation was the gun mount. Instead of bolting the gun rigidly to the turret, Earl designed a hydraulic recoil system. It absorbed 40% of the firing shock before it reached the chassis. The gun traveled backward 18 inches when fired. This transformed instantaneous force into manageable impulse. On paper, it worked. Earl submitted his designs in September 1942. The Ordnance Department rejected them immediately. Too expensive. Too disruptive to Sherman production. Too risky. The M10 was already in production. Good enough. Earl suspected the real problem was different. The Ordnance Department had just spent months proving the 90mm gun was impossible. Approving Earl's design meant admitting they were wrong. Organizations hate admitting error. Earl could have accepted defeat. He was a civilian contractor with no authority. Instead, he went over their heads. He appealed directly to General Bruce. Bruce reviewed the designs for an hour, asked technical questions. Earl answered every one. Bruce studied the drawings in silence. Then he said 4 words. Build me a prototype. December 1942. Earl and a small team began hand-building the T-71 prototype in Aberdeen's workshops. They started with an M10A1 hull, added 3/4 of a ton of structural steel, fabricated the turret in sections, welded and riveted armor plates around a custom turret ring, adapted the 90mm gun from an anti-aircraft mount, installed Earl's hydraulic recoil system. Nothing went smoothly. The turret traverse was too weak. Redesigned. The ammunition racks did not fit. Modified. The gun breech hit the radio equipment. Rebuilt. Earl worked 12-hour days, 7 days a week. His team followed without complaint. They believed in what they were building. By early January 1943, the prototype was complete. Ugly. Rough welds. Mismatched paint. The bustle looked like a tumor growing from the turret, but it was functional. January 23, 1943. The T-71 rolled to Aberdeen's firing range. Temperature 12 degrees Fahrenheit. Ice everywhere. Earl stood 50 yards away with General Bruce and a delegation of Ordnance Department officers. The same officers who said this was impossible. The test crew climbed in. Volunteers who knew the chassis might fail catastrophically. The gunner loaded a 90mm armor-piercing round. Earl had checked his calculations hundreds of times. 95% certain the chassis would hold. 95% is not 100%. If the chassis shattered, the crew could die. His career would end. The gunner's voice crackled over the radio. "Ready to fire." Bruce glanced at Earl. Earl nodded. "Fire when ready." 3 seconds of silence. Then the 90mm gun fired. The sound was not just loud. It was physical. A crack that compressed the air and echoed off the hills. The vehicle rocked backward. Tracks slid 6 inches across frozen ground. Dust and smoke exploded from every seam. Earl stopped breathing. Then the driver's hatch opened. Sergeant Michael Romano climbed out grinning. She held together. Loud as hell, but she held. They fired 47 more rounds that day. The chassis held every time. Against test plates, simulating Tiger armor penetration, confirmed at 1,000 yards. At 1,500 yards, still 4 inches of penetration, enough to kill any German tank from the front. The impossible was now possible. The Ordnance Department officers said nothing. They had no words. Earl had just destroyed their 37-page report with cold, hard steel and physics. But Earl did not celebrate. He knew what came next: bureaucracy, politics, delays. The Army designated the design M36 and approved it for production. Then they assigned it low priority. Sherman production remained the absolute priority. The generals believed overwhelming numbers of adequate tanks would win the war. Maybe they were right about winning, but adequate tanks meant dead crews. The first M36 rolled off the assembly line in April 1944. By then, American armor was already bleeding in Italy. The lessons were being learned in blood. D-Day came in June. American Shermans hit the beaches. Then they hit the hedgerows of Normandy, and the killing began. The hedgerows were a nightmare. Centuries of French farming had created dense walls of earth and vegetation. 4 to 6 feet high. Each field was a fortress. Each hedge was an ambush. German panthers and tigers dug in. Waited. Let the Americans advance into killing zones, then opened fire. The German doctrine was simple. Destroy the lead vehicle, block the road, destroy the rear vehicle, trap everything in between, annihilate. The mathematics were obscene. 1 Panther for 5 Shermans, sometimes 6. The 2nd Armored Division lost 24 Shermans in a single engagement near St. Lo. Crew casualties in some battalions reached 300%. Entire crews replaced 3 times over. The replacements arrived young and terrified. They knew they were climbing into coffins with engines. Lieutenant Colonel James Taylor commanded the 899th Tank Destroyer Battalion. His M10s mounted 3-inch guns. Against Panthers, they needed close range or flank shots. Against Tigers, they were nearly useless. On August 8th, near Mortain Taylor's unit, engaged 5 Tigers. The fight lasted 2 hours. They destroyed 1 Tiger. They lost 6 M10s, 11 men dead, 17 wounded. Taylor wrote in his report words that would haunt the Army. "We are bringing knives to a gunfight. We need better guns." His report went up the chain. Where are the M36s? The answer came back. Limited numbers. Maybe by October. Taylor's men kept dying. August. September. More hedgerows. More Panthers. More telegrams home. Then on September 25, 1944, 18 M36 Jacksons arrived. Not enough. Barely half strength. But the crews treated them like gold. Staff Sergeant Robert Early climbed into an M36 for the first time. Looked at the massive 90mm gun. Felt something he had not felt in 8 months. Hope. Finally, he thought. Finally, we can fight back. 1 week of intensive training. Then they moved to the front. October 3, 1944, near Aachen. Baker Company supporting the 1st Infantry Division. 3 M36s positioned 1,000 yards behind the Sherman column, and then the Panther emerged from the tree line 300 yards ahead of Lieutenant Bates. You know what happened next. The Panther turned. The gun pointed at Bates. 15 seconds to die. Then Sergeant Harold Hightower fired from 1,000 yards away. The 90mm round punched through the Panther's side armor like it was not there. The ammunition inside cooked off. The turret lifted. 3 Germans died instantly. 1 crawled out on fire. Bates walked back to the Jackson on shaking legs. "You saved my life," he told Hightower. Hightower looked down at him, face smudged with powder residue. "That is what this gun is for. About damn time we got one that could do the job." The M36 Jackson had arrived, but the real test was coming. In December, Hitler would launch his last desperate offensive, the Battle of the Bulge. Panzer spearheads smashing through American lines, and standing in their path would be Harley Earl's impossible gun. Would it be enough? Could a handful of Jacksons stop the greatest German armored assault since 1940? In Part 2, we will witness the desperate fighting at Bastogne. We will see M36 crews engage Tigers at ranges that would have meant certain death just months earlier, and we will learn the true cost of the 18-month delay. How many American boys died waiting for the impossible gun? The answer will haunt you. In Part 1, we met Harley Earl, a civilian engineer nobody had heard of, a man who built what the United States Army Ordnance Department declared physically impossible, a 90mm gun mounted on a mobile tank destroyer chassis. On January 23, 1943, his prototype fired 47 rounds without failing. The impossible became possible. But proving a concept and getting weapons into soldiers' hands are two very different things. The Ordnance Department had just been humiliated. 37 pages of expert analysis destroyed by one stubborn engineer with a slide rule. Organizations do not forget humiliation. They do not forgive it, and they certainly do not reward it. Between January 1943 and September 1944, while Earl's design sat in bureaucratic limbo, approximately 4,200 American tank and tank destroyer crewmen died in combat. Many of them engaging German heavy armor with guns that could not penetrate it. Many of them burned alive inside their vehicles. Many of them could have been saved. This is the story of the 18 months that should not have happened. The battle Earl fought not against German tanks but against his own army, and it begins with a man who wanted Earl destroyed. Colonel Harrison Wright commanded the Ordnance Department's Vehicle Division. 47 years old. West Point class of 1918. 25 years of service. A career built on careful decisions and proper channels. Wright had personally approved the 37-page report declaring the 90mm tank destroyer impossible. He had signed his name to it. He had presented it to General Bruce. And now, Harley Earl, a civilian contractor with no military rank and no institutional loyalty, had made him look like a fool. Wright did not attend the January test. He refused. But he read the reports. He saw the penetration data. He knew Earl's design worked. That made it worse. In February 1943, Wright called a meeting of the Vehicle Division Review Board. Earl was summoned. He walked into a room of 12 uniformed officers. Wright sat at the head of the table. No one offered Earl a chair. Mr. Earl Wright began. His voice was ice. "Your unauthorized prototype has created significant complications." "Unauthorized," Earl repeated. "General Bruce ordered me to build it." General Bruce exceeded his authority. "The review board has determined that your design, while technically functional, is not suitable for production at this time." Earl felt his stomach drop. "Not suitable." The words hung in the air. "We have analyzed your proposal," Wright continued. "The M36 design would require extensive retooling of existing production lines. It would divert critical resources from Sherman tank manufacturing. It would delay delivery of proven systems to units that need them now." Earl tried to interrupt. Wright raised his hand. Furthermore, the open-topped turret presents unacceptable crew vulnerability. The ammunition storage configuration creates catastrophic explosion risk. The vehicle's height makes concealment difficult. These are not theoretical concerns. They are engineering realities. Earl found his voice. Every concern you just listed, he said, exists in the M10 tank destroyer already in production. The M36 addresses the one concern that actually matters: whether our guns can kill German tanks. The room went silent. Wright's face reddened. Are you suggesting, Mr. Earl, that the Ordnance Department does not understand what matters in combat? I am suggesting? Earl replied that I have built a gun that can save American lives, and you are looking for reasons to bury it. Wright stood up. This meeting is concluded. The M36 will be assigned Category 3 priority. Limited development. No production authorization until further review. Earl knew what Category 3 meant. Death by bureaucracy. Projects entered Category 3 and never emerged. Wright had just killed the M36 without rejecting it officially. Earl walked out of that room knowing his career was over. He had challenged the wrong man. He had embarrassed the wrong institution. And American boys would keep dying in Shermans and M10s because of it. But Earl did not know that someone else had been watching. Someone with more power than Colonel Wright. Someone who had lost a son at Kasserine Pass 3 weeks earlier. And that someone was about to change everything. Major General Jacob Morrison had commanded armored forces in North Africa. He had seen what German Tigers and Panthers did to American tanks. He had written urgent reports demanding better guns. Those reports disappeared into the same bureaucracy that was killing Earl's design. In March 1943, Morrison's son, Lieutenant David Morrison, died when his Sherman was hit by an 88mm round from a Tiger tank. The round penetrated the frontal armor at 800 yards. David burned to death before he could escape. Morrison received the telegram on a Tuesday. He buried his son on a Friday. On Monday, he walked into General Bruce's office and asked one question. Where is the 90mm tank destroyer? Bruce told him about Earl. About the successful test. About Colonel Wright. About Category 3. Morrison did not say anything for a long time. Then he picked up Bruce's telephone and made a call. Within 48 hours, Earl received new orders. Report to the Army Ground Forces Headquarters. Top priority. Morrison met him personally. I read your file, Morrison said. I read Wright's objections. I read the test results. I also buried my son last week. Earl did not know what to say. My son died because his gun could not kill the tank that killed him. Morrison continued. Your gun can. Tell me what you need. Earl needed 3 things. First, an official combat trial with real units under real conditions. Second, production authorization independent of the Ordnance Department. Third, protection from Wright and anyone else who wanted to bury the project. Morrison made 2 phone calls. The first was to the Secretary of War. The second was to the Commanding General of Army Ground Forces. By April 1943, Earl had everything he asked for. The M36 was redesignated a priority development project. A combat evaluation was scheduled for August. Production planning would begin immediately upon successful evaluation. Wright was not removed from his position. That would have been too obvious. Instead, he was simply excluded from all decisions regarding the M36 program. He learned about the new orders from a subordinate. According to witnesses, Wright did not speak for the rest of the day. Earl had won the first battle. But the war was far from over. The combat evaluation would determine everything. Success meant production. Failure meant Wright would have his revenge. And failure was still very possible. Earl had built 1 prototype. Building 100 was a different challenge entirely. August 18, 1943. Fort Knox, Kentucky. Temperature 93 degrees. Humidity suffocating. Harley Earl stood beside 3 M36 prototypes that had been hand-built over the previous 4 months. Each one represented thousands of hours of work. Each one carried the hopes of every American tanker who had ever faced a German heavy tank with inadequate weapons. The evaluation board consisted of 12 officers, tank commanders, gunnery experts, logistics specialists, men who understood what worked in combat and what did not. Colonel Wright was not present, but Earl knew Wright had allies on the board, men who would look for any excuse to fail the M36. The evaluation would last 3 days. Day 1 focused on mobility. The M36s had to demonstrate they could keep pace with armored formations. Cross rough terrain. Ford streams. Operate reliably under stress. The prototypes performed adequately. Not brilliantly. One developed transmission problems on the 3rd hour. Earl's team fixed it overnight. But the board took notes. Day 2 focused on crew operations, loading speed, turret traverse time, communication systems, escape procedures. The open-topped turret drew immediate criticism. A colonel named Stevens spent 20 minutes describing how artillery fragments would kill exposed crew members. Earl listened without arguing. He had heard it all before. The open top saved 2,000 pounds. That weight savings made the 90mm gun possible. Trade-offs existed in every design. The question was which trade-offs mattered most. Day 3 was the gunnery trial. This was everything. The M36s would engage armored targets at ranges from 500 to 2,000 yards. The targets were constructed from captured German armor plate, Panther quality steel, Tiger thickness. If the 90mm gun could not penetrate reliably, nothing else mattered. Earl barely slept the night before. He checked each prototype personally. Verified ammunition, inspected gun mounts, tested hydraulic systems. At 0600 hours, the crews took their positions. The first target sat 500 yards away, a steel plate angled at 55 degrees to simulate Panther Glace's armor. The M10's 3-inch gun could not penetrate this plate at any range. The board knew this. Everyone knew this. The first M36 fired. The sound was thunderous. The shell crossed 500 yards in less than a second. It struck the plate dead center and punched through. Clean penetration. The plate was not just holed. It was demolished. Entry wound 4 inches wide. Exit wound 6 inches. Any crew behind that armor would be dead. The board members looked at each other. Some wrote notes. Others just stared. The second target sat at 800 yards. Same armor configuration. The second M36 fired. Penetration confirmed. The third target sat at 200 yards. This was the critical range. German tanks typically engaged at 800 to 1,000 yards. If the M36 could kill at 200, American crews would have a decisive range advantage for the first time in the war. Earl held his breath. The third M36 fired. The shell flew for nearly 2 seconds, or it struck the plate slightly off-center. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then the evaluation team approached the target. Complete penetration. The shell had not just pierced the armor. It had continued through and buried itself in the sand berm behind the target. Colonel Stevens, the officer who had criticized the open turret, walked back from the target slowly. He stopped in front of Earl. "Mr. Earl," he said, "I have commanded tanks for 15 years. I have seen a lot of weapons. I have never seen anything like this." Stevens extended his hand. Earl shook it. His own hand was trembling. The gunnery trial continued for 6 more hours. 27 shots at ranges up to 1,800 yards. 24 penetrations confirmed. The 3 failures were all at maximum range against the thickest armor configurations. Against standard Panther and Tiger armor at combat ranges, the M36 achieved 100% penetration. That evening, the evaluation board voted unanimously to recommend immediate production. The M36 tank destroyer was officially approved, 18 months after Earl first proposed it. 18 months during which American crews had died with inadequate weapons. But approval was only paper. Getting M36s to the front would require something even harder than convincing the board. It would require convincing the men who would actually use them. Production began in October 1943, but production was slow. The factories were optimized for Sherman tanks and M10 tank destroyers. Switching to M36 production meant new tooling, new training, new supply chains. By January 1944, only 47 M36s had been built. Earl pushed for faster production. He sent weekly reports documenting the delays. He identified bottlenecks. He proposed solutions. Most of his suggestions were ignored. The Ordnance Department still controlled production priorities, and the Ordnance Department had not forgotten. Meanwhile, American armor was preparing for the invasion of Europe. D-Day was coming. Every Sherman that rolled off the assembly line was one more tank for Normandy. The generals wanted quantity. They would worry about quality later. Earl tried a different approach. He traveled to Fort Benning, Georgia, where tank destroyer battalions trained before deployment. He brought an M36 with him. He offered demonstrations to any commander who would watch. Most were skeptical. They had trained on M10s. They knew M10 tactics. They did not want new equipment weeks before combat deployment. One battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Raymond Davis, agreed to watch. His unit, the 644th Tank Destroyer Battalion, was scheduled to ship to England in 6 weeks. Davis was a pragmatist. He had studied the reports from North Africa and Italy. He knew his M10s could not kill Tigers from the front. Earl demonstrated the M36 for Davis personally, showed him the penetration data, explained the fire control improvements, let Davis fire the gun himself. Davis was silent for a long moment after firing. Then he said 4 words that Earl would remember for the rest of his life. "I want these guns." Davis requested M36s for his battalion. The request was denied. Production priority remained with other units. Davis shipped to England with M10s. His battalion landed at Normandy in July 1944. By August, he had lost 11 tank destroyers and 31 men to German armor his guns could not penetrate. He wrote to Earl from France, "You showed me what we needed. We did not get it. My boys are dying because someone decided production schedules matter more than their lives." Earl kept that letter in his desk for the rest of his career. But something was finally changing. The disaster in Normandy was impossible to ignore. Sherman losses were catastrophic. The kill ratios against German heavy armor were 5-1, sometimes worse. Reports flooded back to Washington, desperate requests for better anti-tank weapons. In August 1944, production priority for the M36 was upgraded to Category 1. Factories began switching from M10 production. By September, M36s were finally reaching the front in significant numbers. The 899th Tank Destroyer Battalion received 18 M36s on September 25th. The 701st received a full complement in October. The crews who had survived months of fighting with inadequate weapons finally had guns that could kill German tanks at range. The effect was immediate. In October 1944, M36-equipped units reported a kill ratio of nearly 3-1 against German heavy armor. In November, that improved to 4-1. German tank commanders began reporting a new American weapon that could penetrate their armor at distances they had previously considered safe. Captured German intelligence documents from late 1944 specifically warned panzer units about American tank destroyers mounting 90mm guns. Harley Earl's impossible gun was changing the war. But success brought new problems. The Germans were not fools. They adapted. They learned to identify M36 silhouettes and prioritize them as targets. They developed new tactics to engage Jacksons at close range where American advantages disappeared. And something else was happening. Something Earl did not learn about until much later. In November 1944, German intelligence captured a damaged M36 near Aachen. They studied it carefully, analyzed the gun mount, examined the hydraulic recoil system, measured the armor penetration capabilities. Within weeks, reports reached Berlin. The Americans had solved the problem German engineers had considered unsolvable. They had mounted a heavy anti-aircraft gun on a mobile chassis, and it worked. The German response would come in the Ardennes. December 1944. Hitler's last desperate offensive. 1,500 tanks and assault guns smashing through American lines. The Battle of the Bulge. The M36 Jackson would face its ultimate test, not against scattered German defenders, but against the concentrated might of 3 panzer armies. Could Earl's impossible gun stop the greatest German armored assault since 1940? Could a few hundred Jacksons hold the line when everything else was breaking? The answer would be written in blood and fire at places called Bastogne and St. Vith and Malmedy. In Part 3, we will witness the desperate stand at the Bulge. We will see M36 crews fight against impossible odds. We will learn what happens when the impossible gun meets an impossible battle. And we will discover the true price of 18 months of bureaucratic delay. The price measured not in dollars or production schedules, but in American lives. Harley Earl built the impossible, a 90mm gun on a mobile chassis. Every expert said it could not be done. He did it anyway. The Army tried to bury his design. He fought back. He found allies. He won. By September 1944, M36 Jacksons were finally reaching the front. American crews had guns that could kill German heavy armor at 1,000 yards. The kill ratios improved immediately. 3-to-1, then 4-to-1, for the first time since North Africa American tankers had hope. But the Germans were watching. In November 1944, German intelligence captured a damaged M36 near Aachen. They studied it. They measured it. They understood what it meant. The Americans had solved a problem German engineers thought unsolvable. Berlin received the reports, and Berlin began planning a response. Not a technological response. Something far more devastating. The greatest German armored offensive since 1940. 1,500 tanks, 3 panzer armies. One objective: smash through the American lines in the Ardennes, split the Allied forces, capture Antwerp, and destroy those deadly American tank destroyers before they could change the war. The Battle of the Bulge was coming, and Harley Earl's impossible gun was about to face its ultimate test. December 1944. The Ardennes Forest. American intelligence believed this sector was quiet, a rest area for exhausted divisions, a place where new units could train before facing combat. They were catastrophically wrong. On December 16th at 0530 hours, German artillery opened fire along an 80-mile front. 20 minutes later, 200,000 German soldiers advanced through the fog. The Americans were completely surprised. Units that had expected a quiet Christmas found themselves fighting for survival. The German plan was audacious. Strike through the thinly held Ardennes. Capture the road junctions at St. Vith and Bastogne. Race to Antwerp before the Allies could react. Cut the Allied armies in half. It almost worked. In the first 48 hours, German panzer spearheads advanced over 30 miles. American units were overrun. Entire battalions surrendered. Others simply disappeared into the chaos. The fog and snow grounded Allied aircraft. German tanks rolled forward without fear of air attack. But the Germans had a problem they had not anticipated. Scattered throughout the American lines were M36 Jackson tank destroyers. Not many. Perhaps 200 in the entire Ardennes sector. But enough. On December 17th, near Stavelot, a platoon of 4 M36s from the 823rd Tank Destroyer Battalion encountered a German column. 14 Panther tanks, 6 armored half-tracks, infantry in support. The odds were impossible. 4 against 14. But the M36 crews had something the Germans did not expect. Range. The Jacksons opened fire from 400 yards. The first Panther exploded before its crew even identified the threat. The second Panther took a round through the turret. The third tried to return fire, but could not acquire a target through the fog and distance. Within 8 minutes, 4 Panthers were burning. The German column halted, confused. Their intelligence had warned them about 90mm American guns. But intelligence reports and burning tanks are different things. The surviving Panthers retreated. The road to Stavelot remained contested for another 2 hours. That delay allowed American engineers to destroy a critical bridge. The German advance on the northern shoulder of the Bulge slowed. Not stopped, but slowed. And in the Ardennes, hours mattered. German commanders began reporting a pattern. American tank destroyers with new guns, engaging at ranges previously considered safe, causing unexpected casualties, disrupting timetables. One captured German officer told interrogators that the 90mm equipped vehicles were prioritized targets. Kill them first, his orders read, before they kill you. But killing them first required finding them first. And the M36 crews had learned to shoot and move. Fire from concealment. Relocate before counterfire arrived. Use the range advantage to stay outside German engagement envelopes. The tactics were not complicated. They were simply impossible with the old 3-inch guns. The 90mm changed the mathematics. But mathematics alone would not win the Ardennes. The Germans had overwhelming numbers. They had momentum. They had desperation. And they were converging on a small Belgian town that would become the most famous battlefield of the European War. Bastogne, a crossroads town of 4,000 people. 7 major roads converged there. Whoever held Bastogne controlled movement through the entire southern Ardennes. The Germans needed it. They could not bypass it. On December 19th, German forces surrounded the town. Inside were elements of the 101st Airborne Division, the 10th Armored Division, various support units, and 12 M36 Jacksons from the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion. 12 tank destroyers against 3 German divisions. The siege of Bastogne lasted 8 days. The defenders were outnumbered, outgunned in artillery, cut off from resupply, low on ammunition, low on food, low on medical supplies. They should have surrendered. The German commander thought so. On December 22nd, he sent surrender terms. The American reply became legend. One word: nuts. But legends do not stop tanks. What stopped tanks at Bastogne was firepower. The M36 Jacksons of the 705th were positioned at key road junctions around the perimeter. Each junction was a potential breakthrough point. Each breakthrough could mean annihilation. On December 23rd, the weather cleared. Allied aircraft began supply drops and ground attacks. But the Germans made one final major assault on Christmas Day. They threw everything they had at the western perimeter. 18 Panther tanks, 7 Panzer IV tanks, infantry in battalion strength. The attack began at 0730 hours. 2 M36 Jacksons commanded by Sergeant James Hendricks and Corporal William Torres held positions overlooking the Champs Road. They had 14 rounds of 90mm ammunition between them. 14 rounds against 25 tanks. The Panthers advanced in column along the road. Standard German doctrine. Concentrate force. Overwhelm the defenders. Exploit the breakthrough. Hendricks let them close to 800 yards. Then he fired. The lead Panther stopped. Smoke poured from the engine deck. The second Panther tried to go around. Torres fired. Direct hit. Turret penetration. The tank brewed up immediately, fire and ammunition cooking off inside. The German column bunched up, vehicles trying to maneuver around burning wrecks. Hendricks fired again. Another hit. Torres fired. Another hit. 4 tanks burning in less than 3 minutes. The German infantry dismounted and scattered. The remaining Panthers began to reverse, but the road was narrow. The ditches were deep. 2 more Panthers threw tracks trying to turn around. Sitting targets. Hendricks and Torres did not waste ammunition. Let the aircraft have them. By 0815 hours, the attack had collapsed. 6 Panthers destroyed. 2 immobilized. The infantry retreated, the western perimeter held. Hendricks later reported his emotions at that moment. "I thought we were dead," he wrote in his after-action report. 25 tanks coming at us, 14 rounds. But those 14 rounds did the job. The 90mm did the job. I do not know who designed that gun, but I would like to buy him a drink. The Christmas Day attack was the last major German effort against Bastogne. On December 26th, elements of Patton's Third Army broke through from the south. The siege was lifted. The 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion received a Presidential Unit citation for their defense. 12 Jacksons, 8 days, against 3 divisions. They had destroyed or disabled 23 German armored vehicles. They had lost 2 of their own. The kill ratio was better than 10 to 1. Bastogne held because paratroopers refused to surrender. Because artillery crews fired until their barrels warped. Because cooks and clerks picked up rifles and fought. But it also held because 12 M36 Jacksons could kill German tanks at ranges the Germans did not expect. The impossible gun had proven itself at the most critical moment of the European war. But Bastogne was not the only place M36s made a difference. Across the entire Bulge tank, destroyer battalions equipped with 90mm guns reported extraordinary results. The 814th Tank Destroyer Battalion at St. Vith claimed 19 confirmed kills in 4 days. The 629th at Houffalize destroyed 14 German tanks while losing 3 of their own. The cumulative effect was significant. German armored losses in the Ardennes exceeded 600 tanks. Not all from M36s. Not even most. Artillery accounted for many. Aircraft accounted for more after the weather cleared. But the tank destroyers contributed something numbers alone cannot capture. They denied the Germans freedom of maneuver. Every road junction became a potential death trap. Every ridgeline might hide a 90mm gun. German tank commanders who had grown accustomed to outranging American vehicles suddenly found themselves vulnerable at distances they had considered safe. The psychological impact was substantial. Captured German documents from January 1945 reveal explicit warnings about American tank destroyers. Avoid engagement at ranges exceeding 800 meters. One tactical bulletin advised. American 90mm guns can penetrate Panther frontal armor at this distance. Close range engagement is essential, but closing range meant exposing flanks, meant navigating terrain under fire, meant taking casualties. The M36 did not give German tank crews an easy choice. It gave them 2 bad choices. And that was the point. By the end of January 1945, the Battle of the Bulge was over. The German offensive had failed. Hitler's last gamble had cost him irreplaceable men and machines. The Western Front would never seriously threaten Allied victory again. How much did the M36 contribute to that outcome? Impossible to quantify precisely. But the commanders who were there had opinions. Lieutenant Colonel Raymond Davis, the same officer who had requested M36s before Normandy and been denied, finally received them in January 1945. His battalion used them during the Allied counteroffensive. "We had spent 6 months fighting with inadequate weapons," Davis wrote later. 6 months watching our boys die in M10s because our guns could not penetrate German armor. Then we got the Jacksons, and everything changed. Not just the kill ratios, the confidence. My crews believed they could win. That belief matters more than any statistic. The ripple effects spread quickly. After the Bulge, every tank destroyer battalion in Europe demanded M36s. Production finally accelerated to 300 vehicles per month. By April 1945, over 1,000 M36 Jacksons were in service. The 90mm gun became the standard American anti-tank weapon. It would remain so for decades. The M36's success also influenced tank design. The M26 Pershing heavy tank, which began reaching Europe in February 1945, mounted a 90mm gun based on the same M3 design Earl had championed. The gun that was impossible in 1942 became essential by 1945. German commanders noticed the change. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, who commanded the Ardennes offensive, mentioned American tank destroyers in his post-war interrogations. "The 90mm guns surprised us," he admitted. "Our intelligence reported their development, but we did not appreciate their effectiveness until we faced them. They could engage our Panthers at ranges where our return fire was ineffective." This was a significant tactical disadvantage. Rundstedt was being diplomatic. The tactical disadvantage he described had cost Germany hundreds of tanks and thousands of men. It had contributed to the failure of the last German offensive in the West. It had shortened the war. The M36 Jackson served until the end. The last confirmed tank kill by an M36 in the European theater occurred on May 4, 1945, near the Austrian border. A Panther. Range 100 yards. The war in Europe ended 4 days later. But the M36's service was not finished. Within 2 months, M36s were being shipped to the Pacific, then to Korea, then to Yugoslavia, then to Pakistan. The last M36 in active military service anywhere in the world was retired by Pakistan in 2016, 72 years after Harley Earl's prototype first fired. 72 years of service for the impossible gun. The men who fought in M36 Jacksons never forgot the experience. Sergeant James Hendricks, who held the western perimeter at Bastogne, survived the war. He went home to Kansas, married his high school sweetheart, worked as a mechanic for 40 years. He never talked much about the war, but he kept a photograph on his desk. A grainy black and white image of an M36 Jackson, his Jackson, the one that had 14 rounds on Christmas Day. When his grandchildren asked about the picture, he always said the same thing. "That machine saved my life. Someone built it, someone I never met. And because they did, I came home." Hendricks died in 2003. He never knew Harley Earl's name. Earl never knew his, but the connection between them was real. An engineer in a warehouse, a sergeant in a tank destroyer. One built the weapon, one used it. Together they changed history. The story of the M36 Jackson should end there, with victory, with vindication, with the impossible gun proving itself in the hardest battle of the European war. But there is one more chapter, the chapter nobody tells. The chapter about what happened to Harley Earl after the war. The chapter about recognition denied, about institutional memory erased, about a man who saved thousands of lives and was forgotten before the bodies were cold. In Part 4, we will follow Earl back to civilian life. We will see the Army's gratitude reduced to a certificate suitable for framing. We will watch as the official histories erase his contribution to a single sentence in a footnote. And we will ask the hardest question of all. What do we owe the people who save us? And what does it mean when we forget them? The impossible gun changed the war, but the man who built it vanished from history. Until now. A civilian engineer with wire-rimmed glasses and a slide rule. An idea that every expert called impossible. A gun that could not be mounted on a mobile chassis. Harley Earl proved them all wrong. He built the prototype in a converted warehouse. He fired it on a frozen January morning in 1943. It worked. Then he spent 18 months fighting his own army to get it into production. Bureaucracy, politics, institutional pride. While Earl fought paperwork, American boys died in tanks with inadequate guns. Finally, in September 1944, the M36 Jackson reached the front. It changed everything. Kill ratios reversed. German tank commanders learned fear. At Bastogne, 12 Jacksons held against 3 divisions. The impossible gun had become the weapon that helped win the war. But wars end. Heroes go home. Medals are given. Parades are held. Histories are written. And somewhere in that process, some people get remembered. Others get forgotten. Harley Earl got forgotten. This is the final chapter of his story. The chapter that explains why success and recognition are not the same thing. the chapter that asks what we owe the people who save us, and the chapter that reveals a connection so improbable, so perfect, that it could not have been invented. Because sometimes history writes better endings than any screenwriter could imagine. The war in Europe ended on May 8, 1945. Harley Earl was in Pennsylvania when he heard the news. He was not at the front. He was not in Washington. He was in a small machine shop outside Harrisburg, working on his next project, some kind of industrial press for a steel company. Earl had returned to civilian life 6 months earlier. His contract with the Army had ended in November 1944. By then, the M36 was in production. His work was done. There was no ceremony, no farewell dinner, no handshake from a general. He simply stopped receiving paychecks from the government and started receiving them from private companies again. In June 1945, Earl received a certificate in the mail. It thanked him for his valuable contributions to the war effort. It commended his dedication and technical expertise. It was signed by a brigadier general whose name Earl did not recognize. The certificate was suitable for framing. Earl put it in a drawer. He never framed it. His name appeared exactly once in the official Army history of the tank destroyer program. One sentence in a footnote. Design modifications by civilian engineer H. Earl. That was it. 14 words. No context. No explanation. No acknowledgement that those design modifications had created a weapon that changed the war. Colonel Harrison Wright, the man who had tried to kill the M36 program, retired in 1946 with full honors. He received the Legion of Merit for his contributions to armored vehicle development. The citation mentioned his leadership in bringing new weapon systems into production. It did not mention his 18-month effort to prevent the M36 from being produced. Wright died in 1962. His obituary in the New York Times called him a pioneer of American armored warfare. General Jacob Morrison, who had championed Earl's design after losing his son, retired in 1948. He never forgot Earl. In 1952, Morrison wrote a letter to the Army's Chief of Ordnance requesting that Earl receive formal recognition for his contribution to the M36 program. The request was denied. The Ordnance Department replied that wartime contributions by civilian contractors were not eligible for military commendations. Morrison kept a photograph of an M36 Jackson on his desk until he died in 1971. Earl went back to designing industrial machinery, hydraulic presses, conveyor systems, mining equipment, the same work he had done before the war. He never talked about the M36. When people asked what he did during the war, he said he was an engineer at Aberdeen. He did not elaborate. He married in 1947, had 2 children, lived quietly in Harrisburg. His neighbors knew him as a mechanical engineer who kept to himself. They did not know he had designed a weapon that saved thousands of American lives. Earl probably preferred it that way. He was not a man who sought attention. He solved problems. That was enough. But recognition is not just about the person being recognized. It is about the society doing the recognizing. It is about what we choose to remember, what we choose to value, what we choose to teach the next generation. And by that measure, we failed Harley Earl completely. The M36 Jackson did not disappear when World War II ended. It was too effective, too useful, too proven. Within months of victory in Europe, M36s were being shipped to the Pacific for the planned invasion of Japan. The atomic bombs ended that necessity. But the Korean War brought the Jackson back to combat. In July 1950, North Korean T-34 tanks rolled south. They were Soviet-designed, medium tanks. Good machines. Dangerous in the hands of determined crews. American forces in Korea initially had nothing that could stop them reliably. The M24 Chaffee light tank's 75mm gun was inadequate. The situation was desperate. Then the M36 Jacksons arrived. On August 17, 1950, near Taegu, M36s from the 78th Tank Battalion engaged a column of T-34s. The 90mm guns that had killed Panthers at 1,000 yards proved equally effective against Soviet armor. 7 T-34s destroyed in a single engagement. The North Korean armored offensive stalled. The M36 served throughout the Korean War. It proved particularly valuable in the mountainous terrain where its ability to engage targets at long range compensated for its relatively thin armor. Crews who had never heard of Harley Earl used his design to defend the Pusan perimeter, to support the Incheon landing, to fight their way to the Yalu River, and then to cover the desperate retreat when Chinese forces entered the war. The Jackson service continued long after Korea. The United States transferred surplus M36s to Allied nations under military assistance programs. Yugoslavia received them in the 1950s. France used them in Indochina. Pakistan operated M36s for over 60 years. The last M36 in active military service was retired by Pakistan in 2016. 72 years after Earl's prototype first fired. 72 years of service across 4 continents. Dozens of conflicts. Thousands of engagements. The design principles Earl pioneered influenced armored vehicle development for decades. The concept of mounting the most powerful available gun on a lightly armored mobile chassis became standard doctrine. The German Kanonenjagdpanzer of the 1960s, the Soviet Su-100 variants, the American M18 Hellcat. All reflected the same philosophy Earl had championed. Build the vehicle around the gun, not the gun around the vehicle. The 90mm gun itself became the foundation of American tank armament. The M26 Pershing heavy tank, which arrived in Europe in early 1945, mounted a 90mm gun derived from Earl's M3. The M46, M47, and M48 Patton tanks all used 90mm main guns. For 20 years after World War II, the 90mm was the primary American tank weapon. Millions of rounds fired in training. Thousands fired in combat. All tracing back to the gun that the Ordnance Department said could not be mounted on a mobile chassis. How many lives did Earl's design save? The calculation is impossible to make precisely. But consider this. During the Normandy campaign, American armored vehicle crews suffered casualty rates approaching 300% in some battalions. After the M36 reached the front, casualty rates in tank destroyer battalions dropped by roughly half. That reduction held through the rest of the European War, through Korea, through decades of Cold War service. Conservative estimates suggest the M36 and its design successors saved at least 15,000 American lives during their service. 15,000 soldiers who came home. 15,000 families that were not shattered. 15,000 futures that were not erased. All because one engineer refused to accept impossible as an answer. The story of the M36 Jackson is not really about a gun. It is about innovation, about institutions, about the gap between what is possible and what is permitted. Every large organization resists change. This is not malice, it is survival. Organizations that chase every new idea waste resources. They lose focus. They fail. The filters that prevent bad ideas from consuming institutional resources are necessary. But those same filters also block good ideas. They cannot distinguish between genuine innovation and foolish novelty. They treat all deviation from established practice as threat. The Ordnance Department was not wrong to be skeptical of Earl's proposal. They were wrong to be certain. Certainty is the enemy of innovation. When experts declare something impossible, they close doors that might lead somewhere important. Earl succeeded because he questioned assumptions. The Ordnance Department asked if a 90mm gun could fit on an existing chassis. Earl asked what chassis you would need to build for a 90mm gun. The distinction seems trivial. It changed the war. This pattern repeats throughout military history. In 1914, British generals declared the tank a useless toy. By 1918, tanks were breaking the deadlock of trench warfare. In 1935, American admirals insisted that aircraft could never sink a battleship. 6 years later, Japanese aircraft destroyed the American battle fleet at Pearl Harbor. In 1943, German engineers said the proximity fuse was impossible to manufacture at scale. American engineers manufactured millions of them. Each innovation followed the same arc. Experts declared it impossible. Someone tried anyway. It worked. The war changed. We like to believe that military necessity accelerates innovation. It does. But it also accelerates resistance. In peacetime, failed innovations cost money. In wartime, they cost lives. The stakes are higher. The caution is greater. The resistance is stronger. Earl faced this resistance and overcame it. But he had advantages most innovators lack. He found General Bruce, who was willing to order a prototype over Ordnance Department objections. He found General Morrison, who had personal reasons to champion better anti-tank weapons. Without those allies, Earl's design would have died in Category 3 limbo. The genius would have been wasted. The lives would have been lost. How many other innovations died because their advocates lacked the right allies? How many other Harley Earls proposed solutions that worked, but never found a General Bruce to champion them? We cannot know. Those innovations left no record. They exist only as absences. As boys who died in battles that should have gone differently. As wars that lasted longer than they should have. As costs we cannot calculate because we do not know what we lost. In 1967, a military historian named Robert Crane was researching American armored vehicle development for a book on World War II tank warfare. He found references to Earl in declassified Ordnance Department files. Intrigued, Crane tracked Earl down in Harrisburg. Earl was 63 years old, retired, living quietly with his wife. He agreed to an interview. The interview lasted 2 hours. Crane took extensive notes. Most of the conversation covered technical details of the M36's development. But near the end, Crane asked a question that produced an unexpected response. "Do you have any regrets about your work on the M36? Earl was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something Crane never forgot. "I regret the 18 months, from January 43, when we proved it worked, to September 44, when they finally got to the front. Those 18 months. I think about them sometimes. I think about the boys who died in M10s and Shermans during those months. Boys who could have had better guns. Boys who could have come home. I did not kill them. The Germans killed them. But I wonder sometimes if I could have pushed harder, found another way, made it happen faster." Crane noted that Earl's voice was steady throughout this statement. He was not crying. He was not emotional. He was simply stating what he believed to be true. Then Earl said one more thing. "I received letters after the war. From boys who used the M36. Not many. Maybe a dozen. They said thank you. They said the gun saved their lives. I kept those letters. They meant more to me than any certificate the Army sent. Because those boys understood what I was trying to do. I was not trying to build a weapon. I was trying to bring them home." Crane published his book in 1971. The section on the M36 included some of Earl's quotes. But the book sold poorly. It went out of print within 2 years. Earl's words disappeared into academic obscurity. Earl himself died on March 14, 1974. He was 70 years old. His obituary in the Harrisburg newspaper mentioned that he was a mechanical engineer who had worked on military projects during World War II. It did not mention the M36. It did not mention the impossible gun. It did not mention the thousands of lives his design had saved. His widow donated his papers to the Army Ordnance Museum at Aberdeen, including the letters from veterans. Those letters sat in archive boxes for decades, rarely accessed, slowly yellowing. Then something remarkable happened. In 2003, Sergeant James Hendricks died in Kansas. He was 81 years old. Hendricks was the tank destroyer commander who had held the western perimeter at Bastogne with 14 rounds of ammunition on Christmas Day 1944. His family was cleaning out his house when they found a box of old military documents. Among them was a letter Hendricks had written, but apparently never sent. It was addressed to Harley Earl, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. The letter was dated February 1945. Hendricks had written it from a hospital in Belgium where he was recovering from frostbite. The letter said, "Dear Mr. Earl, I do not know if this letter will find you. I do not even know if Earl is your real name or if you are still alive. But I have been told that you are the engineer who designed the M36 tank destroyer. If that is true, I want you to know something. On Christmas Day, 1944, I commanded a Jackson outside Bastogne. We had 14 rounds. 25 German tanks came at us. We killed 6 and stopped the attack. I am alive because your gun worked. The men in my crew are alive because your gun worked. I do not know how to thank you for that. I do not know if thank you is even the right word for something like this. But I wanted you to know that what you built mattered. It mattered to me. It mattered to my crew. It mattered to every man we saved by stopping those tanks. I am going home soon. I am going to marry my girl. I am going to have a life, and every day of that life I will owe to you. Sincerely, Sergeant James Hendricks, 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion." Hendricks never sent the letter. Perhaps he did not know how to find Earl. Perhaps he felt awkward about sending it. Perhaps he simply forgot, as the chaos of war gave way to the chaos of peace. The letter sat in a box for 58 years. When Hendricks' family found it, they contacted the Army Ordnance Museum. The museum archivists made a remarkable discovery. Among the letters in Earl's donated papers was a blank envelope addressed to James Hendricks, Kansas. Earl had apparently tried to write back to someone named Hendricks, but never completed or sent the letter. 2 men, one who built the weapon, one who used it. Both had tried to reach across the distance between them. Both had failed. They died without ever knowing the other had tried. From a civilian engineer with a slide rule and a stubborn streak to the weapon that changed the war. Harley Earl proved that impossible is just a word people use when they have stopped thinking. He designed a gun that killed German tanks at 1,000 yards. He fought his own army to get it into production. He saved thousands of American lives and received a certificate suitable for framing. He was forgotten before the bodies were cold. But the men who used his weapon remembered. Sergeant Hendricks remembered at Bastogne. Sergeant Early remembered in the hedgerows. Lieutenant Colonel Davis remembered in France and Korea and for the rest of his life. They remembered because the M36 Jackson was not just a weapon. It was hope. It was the belief that they could fight back on equal terms. It was the difference between dying in a steel coffin and coming home to marry their sweethearts. Between 1944 and 2016, the M36 and its design descendants served in over 20 countries across 6 continents. They fought in World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and a dozen smaller conflicts. Conservative estimates suggest they saved 15,000 American lives and influenced armored vehicle design for 50 years. All because one man asked a different question than the experts. All because he refused to accept no for an answer. If you know another story like this, a forgotten innovator who changed history and disappeared from memory, share it in the comments. These stories deserve to be told. If you want to discover more hidden chapters of military history, subscribe and join us for the next journey into the past. And remember this. Somewhere right now in some office or workshop or laboratory, another Harley Earl is proposing something the experts call impossible. Another bureaucracy is preparing to say no. Another innovation that could save lives is at risk of dying in a filing cabinet. The lesson of the M36 is not just about the past. It is about every moment when someone with a good idea faces someone with the authority to stop them. It is about what we lose when we let certainty defeat curiosity. Harley Earl never became famous. He never received the recognition he deserved. But the boys who came home because of his gun, they knew. And now, so do you. Sometimes the people who save us are the ones we never hear about. Sometimes the greatest victories are won not on battlefields, but in workshops and warehouses by people whose names are forgotten before the ink is dry. Harley Earl was one of those people. He built the impossible, he brought boys home, and he vanished from history. Until now. Remember his name. Remember what he did. And the next time someone tells you something is impossible, ask yourself, are they certain, or have they just stopped thinking?